Okay, the key points from the last lecture. We're looking at a hierarchical model, top-down model, cognitive model, whatever you want to call it. So if you believe in this model that there's a central executive in the brain that controls all the movements, that has the motor programs, that has the ultimate control for the body, the ultimate control over those degrees of freedom, then you as a therapist should try to reestablish this higher center control, because this is the part that we really need to have working. So to get that higher center work again, we're going to have to suppress those low-level reflexes, those inappropriate reflexes that have emerged after the stroke, after the traumatic brain injury, whatever it is, because that injury has prevented the top-down approach, prevented the top influencing those low-level spinal reflexes, for example. So when you're doing that, your treatment from an NDT, pure NDT approach, the original sort of ideas is not quite as popular now, but originally the concept was to follow motor development up the stages. So this is what you're looking at. Here's a patient with stroke with these. If you're trying to influence tone, if you try to influence equilibrium, these are the steps you'll follow up with a patient who had a stroke. So now they're down here. You have to try to inhibit these and facilitate, inhibit, etc., and get up to the higher level cortex. Okay, so in essence, the patient with stroke has been kicked back down a developmental scale to a baby, as it were, and they have to follow these developmental steps back up to reestablish this higher center control over these lower levels. Because again, it's these higher center control is the most important. Okay. We went over some limitations of a pure hierarchical model. If you believe the brain is the total arbiter, the complete arbiter of movement, it has all the say-so in how a person moves. How do you explain how the cat with its cut midbrain can walk on a treadmill, have these phase-dependent reactions, shake his paw in swing phase, walk with 3 legs, walk with 2 legs on one side of the treadmill going faster than the other, etc., etc. There's a lot of movements this cat could make, and other animals have been shown to do this without the brain attached to the limbs. So that's a difficult way to, a difficult problem for a pure top-down approach. Research has shown, though, that if you do suppress these reflexes, like Berta Bobath had said, in that stepwise progression, you don't get normal movement. So you can give Botox the heck out of a kid's spastic diplegic legs, and you're not going to get normal movement, even though the tone is gone. So they would argue that that's the tone. The tone is the issue. If you get rid of the tone, the higher center can now reauthorize or reinitiate normal gait. That doesn't happen, unfortunately. This notion of context dependency means that if you believe motor programs are stored within the brain in terms of muscle commands, you can make a movement, throwing a ball or whatever, from multiple multitude of places in the environment. You can have multiple different initial conditions. It depends on the context how that motor program is going to work. In certain contexts, that motor program won't work if the arm is in different position. So in essence, you'd have to have millions, if not billions, of motor programs stored to allow you to move in all contexts. That doesn't seem logical to me. Degrees of freedom. Okay, the brain is very, very smart, yes, but I think there are still too many degrees of freedom for a central executive control. That is my feeling. Other people believe it's fine. We looked at development of gait. Esther Thalen has shown that when you put a baby, when you stand a little infant on a tabletop, he or she will step in an early infancy, in a month or so. But a few months later, that stepping reflex disappears. The NDT approach, or top-down approach, says that reflex has been integrated and the big brain has taken over and stopped it working. But if you then get that same kid and put him in a swimming pool with water up to his waist, the stepping reflex re-emerges, suggesting it's not an integration issue. The brain hasn't integrated, hasn't taken over that because it's still there when the kid is walking in the water. So how do you explain this? Well, Thalen said the reflex is not integrated after a few months. In fact, it disappears because the baby is put on weight in the legs, put on fat for insulation essentially, and has not developed the muscle strength yet to be able to move those legs in that same stepping reflex. You put the baby in the water, buoyancy helps, and therefore there's less force needed in the muscles to generate that stepping reflex, and therefore the baby will step in the water. If you put the baby in a gravity eliminated position, the baby kicks and steps kind of in space as if it's walking. But because it's a gravity eliminated position, the force required on those muscles is less. Okay, so this is showing that this kind of Thalen's work shows that there can be peripheral constraints of the weight of the legs, constraints of gravity, etc., that can influence movement. Movement is just not only influenced by the brain. My last comment was how much cognition does a cockroach has. So a cockroach, is a very, very low animal, can do lots and lots of motor skills essentially without a brain. You can pull legs off a cockroach and it can still walk. How is that done when the cockroach does not have a brain, does not have a higher center executive? And my argument would be that the mechanisms that explain how a cockroach walks can also explain how we walk. Just because we have a big supercomputer does not mean we have to use it